Hello, I'm Sally Wiener Grotta, and this is What If, Why Not, How, where I chat with authors, artists, and other creative thinkers whose ideas and achievements intrigue me, and whose style of inquiry includes seeking free-flowing dialogues. Today, my guest is W. Ralph Eubanks. Ralph's newest book is When It's Darkness on the Delta: How America's Richest Soil Became Its Poorest Land. His other books are A Place Like Mississippi, A Journey Through a Real and Imagined Literary Landscape. Ever is a Long Time. Great title, by the way. Ever is a Long Time, A Journey into Mississippi's Dark Past. And his personal family saga, The House at the End of the Road, the story of 3 generations of an interracial family in the American South. Now, if I shared all of Ralph's credentials, we'd be here for a little bit too long. So I'm just going to cover a few highlights. Ralph has contributed to an impressive array of outlets such as The Washington Post, Wired, The New Yorker, and NPR. He's the recipient of several fellowships, including a Guggenheim, a New American Foundation, and what is my dream fellowship, someday maybe ever, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard. He was awarded the 2003 Mississippi Governor's Award for Excellence in Literature and as a cultural ambassador for Mississippi. And he's a previous director of publishing for the Library of Congress and former editor of the Virginia Quarterly Review. And the list goes on and on. Ralph and I spoke briefly about some of the issues in his new book, When It's Darkness on the Delta, this past September at the Authors Guild Foundation's WIT Literary Festival. WIT stands for Words, Ideas, and Thinkers. And the theme this year was The Power of Words, which was about writers and activism, something that's clearly a driving force in Ralph's own work. When It's Darkness on the Delta is the story of lived history, a combination family memoir and thoroughly researched history about the Black experience in Mississippi and the traditions, laws, social attitudes, and people who defined and shape and are now working to reshape that experience. I am honored to have Ralph Eubanks here with me for this episode of What If, Why Not, How. Welcome, Ralph.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Sally. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Oh, it's great. Ralph, what I'd really love is for you to introduce the audience a little bit to your new book. If you could read a bit from When It's Darkness on the Delta.
Great. I'm going to read a bit from there's a chapter that's called The Past is a Foreign Country. And that title comes from L.P. Hartley's novel, The Go-Between. It's one of those famous first lines of a novel. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And this is a section that is dealing with probably the version of the Delta that a lot of Americans know as Robert Kennedy's trip to the Delta in 1967. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read just a little bit from that section. In the springtime, the fields of the Mississippi Delta are freshly plowed and reveal the dark, loamy soil that is shielded from view when the cotton crop is in full swing. When Robert Kennedy arrived on April 12, 1967, the fields were also freshly plowed, though not with the precision one encounters today. More than half a century later, as I retrace Kennedy's trip, a sometimes blinding, heavy rain fills the deep ruts between the symmetrically tilled rows until they appear like miniature rivers in these massive fields that stretch out for what seems like forever. Of course, the shacks perched on cinder blocks that Kennedy encountered along Highway 61 are now gone, most of them destroyed or completely in ruins. The road is also now 4 lanes, rather than the simple 2-lane blacktop that existed until roughly a decade ago. To the untrained eye, poverty has been erased from this land. The expensive farm equipment would seem to indicate some measure of prosperity. But the Delta is a place that bears the thickness of memory on its landscape. Even with the sky hurtling rain, I can see the past manifested on top of this rich soil. Poverty exists as part of the blood memory this land bears buried deep in the Delta's soil.
Beautiful. Beautiful, haunting, and quite frightening at the same time. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, when I actually, it was an incredibly blinding rainstorm. As I was driving through the Delta, I found the map in the archive of the route that Kennedy had taken. And I was driving that, and I actually had to pull over to the side of the road part of the time. And that's when I was looking out at that field, and I saw it's like there were rivers out there. It was something to see. Probably a little bit dangerous, but it was something to see.
You write very poetically about the Delta, as we just heard, as though they're not a foreboding, but more like your personal love letter to the region. But you also paint a powerful and painful picture of the effects of the deep-rooted prejudice that turns a blind eye to Black poverty and injustice. Am I correct that, I mean, is this a love-anger relationship that you have with the Delta?
I think it's a love of the land and a love of the people who who live on that land. I think my anger is not with the Delta itself. It is with the policies that have shaped the Delta and the way that particularly Mississippi politicians have allowed the Delta to be left behind. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, that's where the anger for me comes from, because I see all of these missed opportunities to transform this place. That is a place of great beauty, a bleak beauty, mm-hmm. but still great beauty. But also, as I said, it's a place where the blood memory is deep in the land. Yeah. And yes, I've had a long-term relationship with the Delta. I've been going there probably since I was about 7 years old. Mm. And it's cast a spell on me from the moment I first saw it.
You make me want to go there. Just reading your book, I just really wanted to just see what you're seeing.
Well, my family started in the Delta. My father moved to the Delta in 1949, and he worked at a place called Mileston. And that was at the tail end of the resettlement administration. So Mileston was a resettlement administration town. And it was
Could we pause a moment and explain what you mean by resettlement?
Resettlement was part of the Farm Security Administration during the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. So during the Great Depression, there were ways that people trying to boost people out of poverty in the South. The Resettlement Administration had resettlement communities that they started across the country. Mileston was one of them. It was the only one for Black people, and it moved sharecroppers to landowners, and that was really what changed things. And when my father arrives there in 1949, he thinks that this is what's really going to transform this place. Mm-hmm. And he loved it and never wanted to leave. And I have been, and I think that's why he took me back there. Said he wanted me to see it. I was not born there. We left the Delta before I was born. My two sisters were born there, but they've never been back. And I think that is, he instilled that love in me, maybe not so much in them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think maybe they had negative memories of it? Were they old enough to have those kind of memories?
They weren't old enough to have those kind of memories, but I mean, it is the gendered way things worked in my family at the time. Things that that the father did with the son that he didn't do with the daughters. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
being completely honest about it, and one would think that you take your daughters back to this place where they were born,
Mm-hmm.
but they rarely. I mean, we occasionally went there as a family, but mostly it was a trip that the two of us made together.
Do you talk to them about your interests in the Delta? Do they do they respond to what you're feeling and thinking about it, or is it something they'd rather not?
No, they respond to it, and I think they understand it. I mean, my siblings have a very different relationship with Mississippi than I do. I think my relationship for a very long time was like theirs. I mean, I'm an expatriate. I've
Mm-hmm.
returned to Mississippi. I have one foot in and one foot out. I'm here teaching at the University of Mississippi. Then I'm in Washington D.C., where my wife is. Uh, so, but my sisters have not really. They don't have that close relationship with Mississippi that I have because there's a lot of pain associated with
Yeah.
the time that we're growing up. When we're growing up in the 60s and 70s, we're growing up at the height of the civil rights movement. And the memories of that time, the early years of school integration, I've had to wrestle with in a lot of very deep ways that my sisters haven't. I don't blame them for that. I think that's a wound that they don't want
Mm-hmm.
to engage with, and I respect that.
I can understand that. Yeah, very
Yeah.
much so. Um, you weave the blues, the musical blues, into your book, and you actually start the book with a wonderful Albert Murray quote. Quote: "Thus, the very existence of the blues tradition is irrefutable evidence that those evolved it responded to the vicissitudes of the human condition, not with hysterics or desperation, but through the wisdom of poetry informed by pragmatic insight." It's a rather powerful quote, but why did you select that particular quote as the front piece quote for this entire book?
Because Albert Murray taught me to love the blues.
Mm-hmm.
And reading Albert Murray uh, taught me a great deal about the significance of the blues and why it's so much a part of um, the culture of Mississippi. I mean, when I was in college, it was after my sophomore year of college, the blues singer Booker White was making an appearance in the town where my family lived, which is Houston, Mississippi. It's where we were living at the time. And this is the summer after my dad died. I was going through a lot of grief, and my mother said, "We're going to see Booker White." And I turned to my mother and I look her dead in the eye and say, "The blues is the music of oppression."
Oh, wow.
Uh, and and basically she said, "Boy, you're going to this concert." So, and I go there. But that was my attitude about the blues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But so, as a very young man, even though the summer before that, I had been at an all-day Rolling Stones concert, and there were blues singers there. It was very different, but I was just that was the way that I was beginning to think at that moment. I was trying to separate myself from these things that were associated with with the South and with quite frankly um, a culture that was semi-literate, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where I was at that moment. So I chose that because Albert Murray taught me about the blues in ways that I didn't want to engage with when I was a much younger man. And that
Mm-hmm.
quote really means a lot to me.
Okay, great. And the Delta was really the birthplace of the blues, was it?
The
Or
Deltas was the birthplace of the blues. I mean, it's really, you go back with, you know, people who W.C. Handy kind of going to
Mhm.
Tutwiler, Mississippi, and hearing this man playing this guitar in a certain way that he had never heard before. And then that becomes integrated into his music, and it then begins to spread. And it's one of the things I didn't know as a young man. The blues wasn't this music of oppression. It was this music of protest. That the blues was a means of protest. And that's the thing I failed to grasp then. And now that I know that, I very much have embraced that music. I mean, there's even a Spotify playlist for my book. So all of the songs that I mention here are all on a Spotify playlist, because as I'm writing this book, I'm thinking about the blues. I'm driving through the Delta, listening to Charlie Patton. I'm listening to B.B. King. I'm listening to Booker White before I go into Parchman to teach. When will I have my citizen clothes again? So the blues became it's a big part of the way that I was trying to stitch the narrative together. I tell people it's not a book about the blues, but the blues is a through line to understanding the place.
Is there any parallel, other than the roots and the people, between the land and the blues that you feel express each other particularly? Is there anything specific there that you feel?
I think it's, one of the things you have to realize, the Mississippi Delta is a created landscape. It was very thick hardwood forest. And it's cleared mostly in the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century. So this very flat landscape that you see that's largely treeless, that's created. That's a created landscape. And it is this responding to kind of working this created landscape that this music kind of comes out of it. So it's almost as if you can hear the blues howling across that flat landscape. It's unlike, it looks like a prairie, but it was not a prairie. So when I go to Nebraska or Kansas, the grassland prairie, it's a very different landscape. And you think, well, it's flat like the Delta. No, it is flat, but it's because of the river. But it's all cleared, which is, makes it create a created landscape.
It's also a floodplain. The rivers created this too.
Which is why there's so much rich soil there, is that as the river changed course, it deposited alluvium on it. So you've got topsoil that goes down several feet. So it's very rich soil. And that is one of the beauties of the Delta, that dark, rich soil. I was in the Delta with one of my research assistants, and he wanted to take back a jar of Delta soil. So we're going through the airport in Memphis.
Oh my.
And of course it sets off the TSA. But the woman who's there says, she said, well, it's Mississippi soil. And he turns to her and says, honey, this is not Mississippi soil. I said, well, it's Mississippi Delta soil. And she said, and I said, where are you from, ma'am? She says, I'm from Meridian. I said, oh, you're a red dirt girl. And she said, that's right. And that's kind of that difference between these two parts of Mississippi, kind of the red dirt hills of the eastern part of Mississippi, and the really dark, loamy dirt that's there along the river. It's almost as if there are two Mississippis.
I'm a Pennsylvanian, and we have some, almost throughout the state, some of the deepest topsoil, richest topsoil in the country. And I've always felt that defines who I am as a person, because it's the kind of soil that you set your roots in deep. I traveled all over the world on assignment, but I always came home because my roots are here. And I feel like the way you're discussing talking about the Delta and the way you've written about the Delta, it's very much the same kind of thing. What the soil is what forms the populace, what forms the spirit of the people living on it, to me. And I feel you've captured that very richly, as deeply as the soil.
Well, the people who live there have lived there for several generations. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they've worked the soil. Some of them are descendants of people who cleared that land.
Mm.
Even wealthy white landowners may have come there with like a promise and a dream, but through their labor, they now have this. They own this vast amount of land. Think about Big Daddy and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof,
Yeah.
talking about I've got the richest soil this side of the River Nile. So it is. People are really very much invested in, rooted in this place,
Yes.
um, which is why, for me, as it's a very poor place. And someone, I asked them, well, what do you see as what could really save the Delta? And so just depopulate it. And I said, but that really is a way. That's saying to the people who kind of are the descendants of the people who built this place that your connection here is meaningless,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that we have to figure out a way to people to actually live there and thrive and survive there,
Yes.
rather than kind of just leaving it as this you know big space for commercial agriculture.
Mm-hmm. You touched on Milestone, and earlier on while we were talking about your parents going there, and then leaving. Um, and there were other experiments or communities in the Delta also. Um, I, I'd love you to discuss those a bit, but also I wonder, given the time that they were established and the socioeconomical, economic, political situation, were they doomed to fail? Were, you know, how and could they succeed today? I mean, what was it about those? They sounded wonderful on paper.
Yes, I mean they do sound wonderful on paper, and the one that we're talking about is the Delta Cooperative Farm, which became Providence Farm. So the
Yes.
Delta Cooperative Farm begins after a strike by the Southern Tenant Farmers Union in Arkansas. So, and there's a group of, for lack of a better word, Christian socialists from New York who see a way to get people who have been put off their land, bring them to Mississippi, and resettle them there in this cooperative farm community, both blacks and whites, living
Mm-hmm.
on opposite sides of the road, trying to adhere to Mississippi's segregation laws. But interestingly enough, the one thing that the white families would not do is they said, our children are not going to go to school longer than the black children. That they wanted the education to be equal, which I find really interesting. And one of the people who was involved in the development of the Delta Cooperative Farm, and then when they moved further south into Delta Providence Farm, was the Protestant theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. And
Oh.
this is kind of like
Yeah.
a Niebuhr's vision
Mm-hmm.
of what he felt um, rural life could be, particularly thinking about what's going to happen after the war with Providence Farm.
Mm-hmm.
And with Providence Farm, they were getting people ready to come back from the war. And so you have maybe 10 years after the war that they are run out of there for accusations of um, breaches of racial etiquette. And interestingly enough, this all happens just months after the trial of Emmett Till and after Emmett Till's
Oh.
murder. So it's almost, in a lot of ways, it echoes what happened there. Um, there was a family there, the Mentor family, and the Providence Farm had largely become not much of a working farm, but more of a place for people to receive health care. So it was a healthcare cooperative. And Dr. Mentor provided health care to poor blacks and poor whites, anyone there. And they were run out of there. So I found David Mentor, his son, and he said one of the things I really hated was that I think it was actually in the New Republic they wrote about the dissolution of Providence Farm, and they called what happened to them a bloodless lynching.
A what?
And a bloodless lynching.
Oh my.
And he says, I hated that they referred to us that way. And I said, why? And he said, well, because they lynched Emmett Till, and this is happening at the same time. But nothing happened to us. And one of the people who's negotiating their exit from that is a man by the name of Will Campbell, who's a native Mississippian. He's a Methodist minister, and he had this philosophy. He said, "We're all bastards, but God loves us anyway." And he goes to Providence Farm, helping them kind of negotiate this. And he says, "Now, why'd y'all come here in the first place?" He says, "Because we thought Mississippi was safer than Arkansas."
Oh.
And that's really the crazy thing about it. And there's some, one of the things that I learned in the course of this book is that people who had been touched by this, and one of them is the photographer and artist Carrie Mae Weems. Her family was put off land in Arkansas. I had seen these photographs of them when I worked at the Library of Congress, and I didn't know that was her family. He says, those are the only photographs I have of my family. And eventually moving there and seeing that the photographs really kind of capture the disaffected nature of the way that people felt, and the way that they moved there with nothing but hope. And they didn't give up hope. And that's incredibly inspiring. And, so the Delta has this series. You have Mileston, you have the Delta Cooperative Farm, you have Providence Farm. And what the through line for all of them is that in some way, something experimental that's never been tried before is kind of quashed by the state of Mississippi, by political forces here that think someone's not following the racial protocols. These black people own too much land. Maybe we don't have a lot of control over where they sell their cotton. All of these things have kind of these forces of white supremacy end up crushing these things that could have been transformative for a region.
Are these some of the opportunities you were that you're angry were never handled correctly, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes. There's not only kind of those from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but getting into the 60s with the war on poverty, because Mississippi fought a war on the war on poverty. Because with the Office of Economic Opportunity, one of the requirements was that for Office of Economic Opportunity grants, that civil rights laws were followed. And that's not something that Mississippi in 1964 wanted to do.
Yeah.
Robert Kennedy's coming to the Delta in 1967 because farm automation has come in and has once again dispossessed people from the land. They're being thrown off plantations. There are pesticides that are being used to defoliate the weeds, but keep the cotton alive. So you don't need people to hoe what we call chopping cotton. So you don't need labor. You don't need laborers in the fields to chop the cotton. You don't need them to pick the cotton. So what are all of these people going to do? And they have nothing to do, nowhere to go, no way to get food. And Robert Kennedy comes to bring attention to this. And at the same time, Mississippi's, Senator John Stennis is calling attention to this Head Start program that has begun in Mississippi and basically saying, we have got to take this over because, he doesn't say it in these words, but the reason what he is saying is this is being run by black people who were part of the civil rights movement. They cannot be trusted. Black people cannot be charged to run their own institutions. white people have to oversee them.
Yeah.
And so these ideas of white supremacy really has kept the Delta in this stasis, and that's why it's remained so poor. So I see that, you have the war on poverty, which actually worked. What happened is in the 1970s, wages began to stagnate. So
Mm-hmm.
wages were beginning to stagnate. We were getting too far into Vietnam. So
Yeah.
those are the two forces that really, began to undermine that within the government. Then you have Nixon's new federalism that comes in, and then
Mm-hmm.
they dismantle the Office of Economic Opportunity. And then you have Reagan's, really emphasis on market forces. And then in the 90s, you have welfare reform. And that is kind of the death knell of these people getting out of poverty in a way, because the money is being controlled now by the states. The state of Mississippi does not have a good record of trying to bring people out of poverty.
Yeah.
So yes, we're trying to, Bill Clinton was trying to change welfare as we knew it. But I don't think that he understood exactly what the long-term consequences were going to be of changing welfare
Mm-hmm.
as we knew it.
So the way you're telling it, it sounds to me like the white supremacist power in Mississippi is still just as strong. Is there, what do you see? How do you compare the power structure today in Mississippi to the power structure when your father was a young man, or at any point in the
I mean,
history?
it is different. It is. I mean, I think there's a sociologist, Eduardo Punilo Silva, who says this is where we have a situation with racism without racist. That you have politicians who feel that what they're doing is the best for the state, that they're thinking about this through a colorblind lens, but they're not taking into account any of the history, any of the backstory of this. It's always kind of looking ahead. Let's not look back at that. Don't look at that. Don't look at poverty. So I'd say in a lot of ways, there is not the raw racism that
Mm-hmm.
my father confronted in the 40s and 50s, but it is underneath the surface of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people who who you would speak with them, they would describe themselves as good Christian people.
Yeah.
That's how they think of themselves. And I have been in rooms with them. They're nice people, charming people, but there is this willful blindness
Mm-hmm.
about poverty, and that
Well,
we don't have to
mm-hmm.
we don't have to pay attention to it, because people are poor because poverty is a choice,
Mm-hmm.
rather than we have design. That poverty is by design in a place like the Delta.
Mm-hmm.
That was the design of the place, was to keep certain people who were for a long time disenfranchised, now not disenfranchised, but still poor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You got the power of the vote, but you never got the power of the purse.
Right. Right. Now, you received the Governor's Award, which is quite a nice honor. But how is your writing and your perspectives taken, responded to by legislators, people in power? Do you feel that this is another part that they just don't want to see? Or is there a dichotomy there?
There is a dichotomy there. I think there's a great deal of pride in Mississippi in the work that I have done as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
There may be some discomfort in some circles about the issues in Mississippi that I focus my writing on.
Right.
My last book really focused on the literary landscape of Mississippi. That's something that everyone can really kind of gather. Mississippi has, it's a factory for writers. I mean, we have, and I say, Eudora Welty famously said, well, we're going to have so many writers because we have so much to explain. And we do have a lot to explain.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very, very unifying. This is a very different look at Mississippi. It's looking at a place in the way that we as a state have failed a section of the state. When I got back to Mississippi, it will be 10 years ago in January. I was in at some fancy party where a legislator said to me, if we didn't have the Delta, we'd rank 25th in the nation. And I kept hearing that all the time. And that's when I started saying, let me fact check this. Mm-hmm. And that's when I learned, no, the Delta is not doesn't have that large of a population. It's a small percentage of the population. The entire state is poor. Mm-hmm. So, but we want to pin this on one region.
Right.
And that's what kind of sent me down this, looking very closely at, well, why is the Delta so poor? And also kind of confronting my own blindness about it, having gone there my entire life, and realizing that even I just thought of that poverty as part of the landscape. So it's almost the way that we as Americans romanticize poverty. These poor people, these noble poor people.
Right.
And there's nothing noble about living in a sharecropper shack. Whereas the writer Linda Williams Jackson, who is a children's book writer, said, she said, I grew up in a shotgun shack. You didn't know what was going to crawl up through the floor. And she said, there's nothing romantic about it at all.
Right.
But I think growing up in Mississippi, you're taught there's certain things that you just don't pay attention to or that you just don't talk about. Yeah. And poverty in the Delta is one of them.
In the book, I loved your stories about your backroads research and the people you talk to. These are the witnesses of what's been done to and in the Delta. And you have some wonderful conversations. Yet you're coming in, at this point, you're coming in from the outside. And how difficult was it getting people to talk to you? Was there a sense of sensitivity? I mean, because you're talking about the tourists who love looking at shotgun houses and things. How did that dynamic play for you?
What I always had to do is I had to play my Mississippi bona fides card. That, I'm in the Delta. My family came to Mississippi. My father arrived in Mileston in 1949 from Tuskegee. Mm-hmm. And when I would tell, that was my calling card.
Right.
That, yes, I'm driving around here in a car with Washington, D.C. license plates, but I am from here. I may not sound like I'm from here, but I am from here. And that's how I got people to trust me. Thinking about Eddie Carthen, who I interview in the second chapter of the book, who was the mayor of Chula, Mississippi. And Eddie's not quite sure what to make of me at first. And I played a little bit of Mississippi geography with him, trying to figure out where he was. And then we learned that his college roommate was the son of one of my father's friends. Uh-huh. So it's like, Mississippi, that's kind of it's a very Mississippi connection. Mm-hmm. And that allowed him to open up.
Right.
So it was like, I knew there was a little bit of reluctance there, but I could tell. So it's just like, okay, what card can I play? And that's very often what I did was I played the Mileston Tuskegee card.
Yeah.
Because there were so many people who came to the Delta from Tuskegee in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
So that's how I did it. Getting people to to trust me that way.
They're wonderful stories. They've
Well,
come
thank you.
alive for me. Now, what solutions do you envision for lifting people of the Delta out of poverty? Or maybe not solutions, but paths or processes that might help develop solutions. Where do you see the future for
I
them?
think we've thought about, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation spent a great deal of money in the Delta, their Mississippi Delta project. And when they left the Delta, Gloria Dickerson, who's one of the people I interview in the book, said, "Why are you leaving?" And she said, "Well, we realized that we were doing this work, but the people won't change." And Gloria said, "Well, who's doing that work? Who's changing the mindset of the people?" She said, "I'm going to do that." And I think that I've begun to see how that is really having an impact on young people there. So I think that's one thing. I think also we can't expect philanthropy to do all of the work. Philanthropy only works in collaboration with the government.
Right.
So it has to be a partnership. It can't
Mm-hmm.
be either or. And I guess another piece of that would have to be that philanthropy and government work really needs to be oriented toward particular regions and or towns of the Delta, because what I've learned is every town and every county has its own story, and there are forces that have kind of affected that place in ways that are different from somewhere else. A great example of that is Sunflower County. James Eastland owned a huge plantation there. Parchment is there, thousands of acres. It's the longest county in Mississippi. So it was just this kind of. So you've got lots of. It was a place of cotton barons that brought a very different mindset there than it did, say, in Milestone, in Holmes County, on the edge of the Delta, or if you go to a place like Greenwood or Greenville. These are all places that had unique culture and history. You have to take all of that into account. And I think there was a one-size-fits-all approach to philanthropy from the Kellogg Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no real cooperation or alliance with government. And I think so it's got to be both of those things. And it also has to, I think this is not just the Delta, but any place of deep disadvantage, because there are lots of deltas around this country.
Yeah.
And
That was my next question. I wanted to know what lessons would you like the rest of the country to take from the Delta and from the research you've done and the stories you tell?
I think the first thing is that we as a nation have to stop turning a blind eye to poverty. That we have to begin to look at it directly in the eye. And we have to begin to think, rather than thinking about it as a personal failing, understanding how the history of certain places makes them poor. Sunflower County and Martin County, Kentucky, where I end the book, they are equally poor, but the racial demographics are different. And they're both, coal mining was extractive, cotton was extractive. You've got two extractive industries, but the forces that created them are different. So what works for Appalachia is not going to work for Mississippi. But we have to understand that the forces that created the poverty that is there, rather than denying that these extractive economies were part of the place.
Right.
Think that we're just starting over. Well, you can't just start over. That's part of the history of the place.
That seems to be calling for local control over what is going to be done to lift people up. And yet then we go into the situation of depends upon whether the local government wants to do this. And to have a federal government come down and boom, it's denying the individuality of the communities, but to wait for the state government to lift it up depends upon the state government. And it seems to me that there are states who just wouldn't give a damn.
Yes, and I think Mississippi is one of them. It's Mississippi really should be. I mean, we have a brain drain in the state.
Mm-hmm.
We're the only southern state that has lost population, and I think this is we have to look deeply in the mirror and ask ourselves why. And the reason we are losing population is because we're allowing communities to die. And we're even allowing our state capital to fester without, access to clean water and
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure. So we're even allowing that to go on.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a young person today, why would you want to stay?
Right.
You'll want to leave. And for my students who ask me, should I stay or should I go? You came back, and what I say is, yes, I did come back. I said, but leave, but don't come back unless you have something that you want to do when you get back here. When I got back here, I can't say that I knew what I wanted to do. I was, teaching at a little liberal arts college, Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi. I was the Eudora Welty visiting chair in Southern Studies. It was a really lovely position. But at that point, I hadn't quite figured out what I wanted to do. And I, told my friend, the writer Roy Hoffman, I think we were texting the night I got back to Mississippi. I said, I'm back in Mississippi. This is the place I've spent my life escaping, and now I'm back here. He says, that's what you're writing about from now on. And I think that helped me find my purpose as a writer. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got back here. It's just that I knew that I was almost 60 years old and I didn't have a job. And it was the first time in my life I had been without a job. What am I going to do with my life? And that's where Roy's words have really stuck with me. And he said, this is what you're doing. And that's been, I feel that has been my purpose. Interestingly enough, this book is coming out on January 13th, 2026. I arrived back in Mississippi January 13th, 2016.
Wow. That is.
And I did not pick the release date.
Okay. And did your publisher know that history?
No, he did not.
Well, it's a good celebration.
Yeah, so it is for me. Originally, this was to be a fall book. Got caught up in the editorial ringer there, but I think that there was a reason.
Right.
That this is 10 years after I've gotten back to Mississippi. Well, and it's basically taken me. This is a book that has taken me, that I've been thinking about for 10 years. Yes, I wrote a place like Mississippi in between, but if you look at a place like Mississippi, the largest part of that book is on the Delta.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was thinking about. I was driving all over this state, going to every region of the state. As a friend of mine says, you're the only person I know who's been to all 82 counties in Mississippi. And yes, I have been. And it was, so for me, this book has been kind of a homecoming.
Wonderful. Before we leave, as a favor to me, because I was just taken back by the quality of the writing and the way you brought the whole book to such a luminous ending, I would love you to read the last paragraph of it, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Let me find that here. I thought I had marked it. In the delta town of Friars Point, the evening sun descends with an air of southern charm that masks the sorrow underlying the land's blood memory. While sunsets in the American West are more dramatic, with their skies streaked lipstick red above mountains and mesas, here the dimming of the day feels haunted. As I walk along the top of a levee, I sometimes imagine the song many of the levee workers sang to the setting sun, which they called Old Hannah. Go down, old Hannah, don't you rise no more. You rise in the morning, bring judgment day. Go down, old Hannah, don't you rise no more. If you rise in the morning, set the world on fire, set the world on fire. I often think of the disconnect between the peace I feel and the pain of those who built what lies beneath my feet. An intimate connection with the Delta's landscape doesn't erase its past or its problems, nor does it hide them away. Encountering a place that many claim to know, but few choose to understand, leads not only to lasting memories, but also to a deeper understanding of this country. To change what we see on the Delta's landscape, we must seek to understand it and confront difficult truths about how and why inequality is so much a part of its existence. And one of the ways to do that is to walk its fields, levees, wetlands, and sacred spaces to connect with the land itself. Along the way, you will meet people who will change the way you see the Delta and places like it. As you walk and think about the Delta's past and listen to the voices of its people, begin to imagine its future and remove the veil over the mirror that keeps the region a separate and forsaken place. Look deeply into the Delta's mirror, and you will see America staring back at you.
You just gave me chills. I want to walk the Delta with you someday. It just sounds magnificent, haunted, and something that I need to understand.
I do think it's something that we all need to understand as Americans, because I believe that in the Mississippi Delta it is America's mirror, and that if you look in that mirror, you can see the roots of income inequality in this country in the Delta. Mm-hmm. And if we can begin to grapple with that in ways that we haven't for so long, maybe we can begin to turn things around for the Delta and other places like it. And I always emphasize, it's not just the Delta.
Yeah. It's
places like it, because there are other places like it all around the country.
Thank you so much, Ralph. This has been
you.
Fabulous. My guest today was W. Ralph Eubanks, whose newest book is When It's Darkness in the Delta, which, as you just heard him say, is coming out this January. It is currently on pre-sale in Amazon, and you've heard me say this over and over again. One of the best ways to support an author is please pre-order his book. It makes a big difference in the way the book is launched. You can connect with Ralph on his website, wralpheubanks.com, as well as on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads. As for me, my two newest books are Of Being Woman, a collection of feminist science fiction from Noble Fusion Press, and Daughters of Eve from Bait, which is an essay-based workbook and journaling guide. My website is sallywienergrotta.com. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, sometimes on Blue Sky. And now, finally, I'm on Substack. Like the past 2 weeks, I am. 2 Substacks, in fact. My own personal page of essays, interviews, and such, and as a contributor to Judith Magazine, which I'm very proud of that association. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much, Ralph. This was a wonderful experience just talking to you about the Delta.
It's wonderful to talk with you too, Sally.